Hello, welcome back. We're going to start number 22 on the spring 2010 final exam. Assume the following premise is true. If Joe has to use an Elmo projector, then he's going to have a headache. If Joe has a headache, he will not be in a good mood. Joe's in a good mood. So which of the following is logically valid, a logically valid conclusion using all of these statements? And we mean these statements up here. First thing you do is you look for anything that's very specific. So like these if-thens are not very specific because something needs to happen in order to talk about, like, sort of the truth values of these. For example, do we know he's using an Elmo projector? Do we know whether he has a headache? We're not sure yet. But we do know he's in a good mood. So we get to start right here. Okay, so down here we have a picture of John. He looks happy. He looks like he's in a good mood. Okay, so we now have premise 3 done. All right, so we need to figure out a way, how can we go from premise 3 about, Joe, oops, his name is Joe. Let me change that. I suppose he was in a good mood until I messed up his name. Anyways, in order to go from premise 3 to one of these other two premises up here, we need to find the one that has to do with him being in a good mood or not a good mood. Okay, as long as it has something to do with a good mood. And so the first one has an Elmo projector and a headache. That has nothing to do with being in a good mood. Okay, but premise 2, it says if he has a headache, he will not be in a good mood. Okay. Now to go from premise 3 to premise 2, this is using an indirect, let me write that out, indirect reasoning. Indirect means given something, like he's in a good mood, Joe's in a good mood, if it goes kind of like back through behind the if-then, so you come in back here and you're negating the consequent, because that's how indirect reasoning works. If you negate the consequent, you negate the condition. Okay, so he's in a good mood, which is negation of this, which means we get to negate the headache, meaning that combining these two, we now know Joe does not have a headache. Now let's just stop and think about that for a second, because he's either going to have a headache or not. Okay, do we all agree with that? He's either going to have a headache or he's not going to have a headache. But know this, that if Joe has a headache, what can we guarantee? Because these premises are true. If Joe has a headache, what is the one thing that we can guarantee? Joe's going to be in a bad mood. So if he has a headache, he's going to be in a bad mood. But what do we already know? He's in a good mood. I mean, look, thumbs up. He's smiling. He's in a good mood, which means there's no way he could have a headache. So Joe has no headache. All right, so now that's where we are. Let's see if we can use premise 1. The only way that we can use premise 1 is if we already know information about whether he's using an Elmo projector or whether he has a headache or not. Okay, now we already know he has no headache. And notice that negates this consequent here. So it's going to be another indirect. So he has no headache, which means and you negate this. He's not using the Elmo projector. And how can we be so sure he's not using the Elmo projector? Because if Joe has to use an Elmo projector, he's going to have a headache. Well, we know he doesn't have a headache. So it means there's no way he could have been using the Elmo projector. Because, again, if he did, he'd have a headache, which we already know he doesn't have. And how do we know he doesn't have a headache? Because he's in a good mood. Because of the thumbs up. Okay, so let's see what we have. Joe does not have a headache. Okay, so far that's good. But notice that was only after using the first and second premise. If Joe did not have to use the Elmo projector, we also know that's true. Okay, and that was using the third, or all three premises. So even though that this is true right here, this one is using all three premises. If Joe has to use an Elmo projector, then he will not be in a good mood. This is actually a true statement, but it's not the valid conclusion using all three statements. This is actually a valid conclusion if you just use premise 1 and 2. So let me do that. Premise 1 and 2. All right. If Joe is in a good mood, then he does not have a headache. Well, this uses premise 2 and 3. Okay, if Joe does not have a headache, then he did not use the Elmo projector. That uses premise... Actually, this uses premise 1 and premise 2. This one up here for C, that actually uses premise... No, sorry, we're actually fine. So each one of these use only 2, but this is the one that uses all 3. So the answer to number 22 is B.